Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club. Thank you for taking time from your busy day to join us. This is Women in Manufacturing, a weekly conversation on topics with a focus on tech and manufacturing. In this space, we discuss the perspectives and challenges of women at work and at home. Our topics of discussion today is titled Learning from Failure and Success. I'm Carol Mitchell-Lin, an Industry 4.0 Club co-founder. For over 5 years, I've been creating content around Industry 4.0 adoption in manufacturing. When I'm not supporting my fellow co-founders, I'm a content marketing specialist at Raven AI. And at Raven, what we do is we help manufacturers engage operators to provide more meaningful content for productivity on the shop floor. First, I'd like to introduce my co-host and fellow Industry 4.0 Club co-founder, Grace Donovan. Hi, Grace.
Hi, thanks, Carol. So as Carol mentioned, my name is Grace Donovan. I'm also a co-founder here of the Industry 4.0 Club. I'm very excited for this conversation today. And again, when I'm not here hosting conversations with Carol and our fantastic guests, I work for Endonics, which is a startup in Detroit that connects people, processes, and machines on the shop floor to drive productivity and boost engagement of frontline manufacturing workers. And we are thrilled to have Sara with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. We're really happy to have you as our guest. Just a quick note, Sarah is the Senior Director of Project Management at GE Transportation and founder of startup Leverage for Data, who's joining us from Pennsylvania, USA today. Thanks very much, Sarah. First, I would like to apologize. We did have a slight technical difficulty with the timing of our event. We hope that everyone has found this new LinkedIn Live event. And if you don't get it, we hope that you can find it later on. Okay, Grace, back to you.
All right. So to kick things off, Sara, thank us again so much for joining us. We'd just like to invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an idea of where you are today and the journey that brought you to this current position so that we can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure, thanks. First of all, Grace, Carol, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you and share a little bit about my story. My name is Sara Hanks. I'm a mother of 4 and a wife. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania. My career journey started really back in grade school and into high school. I had a natural tendency to enjoy those STEM type courses. I really loved math. I really loved science. And I had 2 technical parents. So my father was an engineer at Xerox, and my mother, she got into IT is in her career. And so, with their mentorship and their support, it kind of pushed me towards pursuing an engineering career. So I attended the University of Buffalo and graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering and joined at the time. It was the 2000 greatest company on the planet, best place for engineers to land was GE. They had a training program that really opened my eyes up to all sorts of facets of engineering, because every 6 months you got to do something different. All the while you get to actually take classes too. So, through that experience, I actually discovered that design engineering was not my forte and that I definitely like problem solving a lot better. And after being what's called the Six Sigma Black Belt, which is, a role where you're specifically solving problems, I moved into manufacturing. I loved being in manufacturing. I did it for 5 years, being part of the process to make product, being able to talk to people on a regular basis. You're constantly fighting fires. And in that journey, I really discovered that I like the data and I like the technology side of things. So for the last decade, I've been part of what I'll call digital transformation. And that's really taking what was once a paper-based process or email or verbal and really transforming your business to be more data-oriented, transacting things through systems. And most of that was involved in quality, but I had a good deal of it in data analytics as well. And that takes me to where I am today, which is the senior director of project management. And so my team looks at complex business problems and figures out, well, what are the root causes and how do we implement technology to solve those problems? And then the one thing I'll add is I do like to volunteer as well. And I'm on the Northwestern Industrial Resource Center. They're one of the national manufacturing extension partnerships. And they work with, small, mid-sized manufacturing companies and help support them through different programs. And, it's a nonprofit organization. So
that's very cool. Thank you. It's quite a journey as well. And I'm sure we'll dive in as well to some of like the successes and failures along the way, right?
Lots of lessons learned.
Yes, so many. But I did want to quickly touch on, you said of the last 10 years, you've been working in digital transformation. And I think one thing that we do touch on very often in the Industry 4.0 Club is that, this is a journey and it's something that's continually ongoing. So can you maybe touch on how that has evolved, over that time, how priorities have changed, or even some of the progresses that you've seen? I know it's like a big question, but I think it's important to kind of highlight what that journey looks like.
I think the biggest shift that I'd like to point out is really with regards to the people and how things get implemented. I mean, there's a technology element and there's lots of resources out there that can kind of explain what's changed from a technology perspective over time. But I think the thing I'd like to share is, when I first started, it was very much like a tops-down approach of implementing a system. And it was very focused on specific business processes and different, we had a very specific objective in mind, and it was to implement an IT system to solve a number of different business processes. And it was a tops-down approach. And looking back, I would say there wasn't as much consideration for the user interface aspect of it. There wasn't as much interest in maybe the how or the usability of things. And I think a lot of that has changed. I think there's a lot more recognition that, in order to get data out of a system, you need to make it easy to put it into a system. You need to look at automation and really engage the front line up front, and include them in the process. And I think that's probably the biggest shift that I've seen over the last decade from a people perspective.
Yeah. And something that we've even begun to discuss, it's Industry 5.0 is where we're going. And it's very, very focused on people and less so on machines. So I think that absolutely tracks with even some of kind of like the more macro trends that we're seeing. I'm excited to dive more into that, but I'll pass it over to Carol.
Yes, I would like to second that. I'm seeing the more human-centric approach and really finding ways to get the voice of the operators heard. So the entire team can communicate more effectively. Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I want to go back, Sara, to a post you have on LinkedIn, I think from last week, where you shared the first time you filled in for a supervisor on a lean line, and you talked about yes, we do celebrate our successes, but you also mentioned that it's not a bad thing to accept that you've failed and learned from something, and that's part of the process. And I really wanted to go into that a little bit deeper, but whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to just to summarize that experience real quickly. When I was in my late 20s, my goal was to be a plant manager. That's what I wanted to do. And I had found a mentor. And considering I had a really big background in engineering and I was working in quality within manufacturing, the recommendation was you really need to get that operations and supervisory experience before, you can look at taking that leap into a business leader or plant manager type of a role. And so I didn't want to wait for my next job. So I took the opportunity, and when our second shift supervisor decided to take vacation, I filled in, and I was the quality engineer of that area. So naturally, I thought I knew everything, and I definitely knew all of the people. So I wasn't humble enough to ask questions and really understand, like, what do I need to do to start day one? I just stepped in knowing everything, right? And it turned out I didn't know a thing, because what I didn't understand is that in order for the manufacturing process to be streamlined, you need material. You need parts to be able to assemble parts. And I missed that. And there's a big obvious square on the floor. I mean, it was obvious there was no parts. There should have been. It was clearly marked. It was definitely my ego that failed in that moment. And the expense was, we ended up sending, like, it was a lean line. So every so often you would shift the work cell over, and we ended up with a big hole, and they had to play catch up with overtime. So it was an expensive mistake. I mean, maybe not in the grand scheme of things, but they did have to pay to make up for my my miss there. And I think it was a big lesson in, like, checking yourself and learning to ask questions and don't have assumptions. Maybe even, from the operators, I knew everybody's name. Why couldn't I just stop in and say, hey, is there anything you need? What can I do to help you?
Well, I guess, and then that begs the question too, how did you kind of find out the material was missing? Did someone come and find you, or how was that ultimately resolved?
So it was like 5 minutes before the line needed to move, and I wanted to do a final walk to see where things were. And then it was the first station, and I was like, oh, wait, this was supposed to have been done. And I had got a response of, well, we didn't have these parts.
Yeah. So it sounds like, it sounds like, of course, there's one thing of, like, not asking certain questions, like making sure you have everything you need. But then it also sounds like maybe because at that time it was still very top down, and this is me kind of like assuming, but no one came to you and said, hey, we don't have a lack of material.
Yeah, there might have been a cultural element to it, to be honest, because I think, especially me being new, and, I think in hindsight, there was definitely a cultural element to it.
I'm curious, Sarah, if there was a change in process as a result of that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I own that mistake, because I mean, I really put that one on myself. I think in other cases I can give examples where, my failure led to an actual process change. I remember in my first program management job, there was, I made a mistake with presenting to one of the senior leaders, and I had grabbed the wrong version of a PowerPoint presentation. And that one, it's like, wow, he knew I had the wrong one because he printed out the prior month's presentation. And so as a result of that, we really shifted our operating mechanisms and changed the way we did things internally so that it wasn't a rush to get to that senior level position. And so we introduced things like, well, let's have a core team meeting. We'll use the same deck of parts. Let's make sure that we're populating the dates and the updates in those core team meetings so that it's less preparation required for that senior stakeholder meeting later. Just to give an example.
Yeah. Little tweaks like that. I've, run into similar kind of issues and in things before. I think everyone has. But this is just kind of like my own personal takeaway is that oftentimes I learn so much more from failures than successes. Obviously, it's much more painful, but if you're not failing forward, then it's kind of like the expression that I like to say. If you're not failing forward, then you're really just kind of stagnant or maybe stuck in a loop. So I don't know if that's also been your experience. Mine has just been that, failure, while difficult, is certainly much more informative and really kind of checks, again, those assumptions or kind of, brings down that confidence a notch when it was a little too inflated.
Yeah, no, Grace, I agree with you.
Mhm.
And I think if you can fail forward and fail fast, it's even better.
Oh yeah, get that iteration loop going.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I try to emphasize within my team is, it's okay to take risks, but
Mhm.
test often, figure out if you're in the right direction, and if something isn't working, kind of discover and pivot accordingly.
Well, I think leads me beautifully into my next question. So thank you. But having that like leadership perspective of communicating that it's okay to iterate and test and fail, there is a difference, like especially I think in how that gets communicated to the front line of like it's okay to experiment. I work for a startup, and that's very much the message that I get from my CEO of like, yes, we are experimenting and we're trying new things. So it's okay if it doesn't, not if nothing, if it doesn't work out all the time, but we have to experiment. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in a rut. And like, really, that's how innovation is born. So I know that, Carol and I work very much kind of on the technology side of connecting with, frontline users, and you're a little more kind of boots on the ground. But when it comes to building the relationship between like frontline operators, data, and then the leadership piece and how you really connect all those dots, what is your approach to getting that buy-in and getting people excited about using data, and then the role that leadership plays in making that possible?
So I think it starts really with the leader and what is their strategy. I think understanding the purpose, why do we want to do what we want to go do. I think often with these types of things, it's involving change. And there's a current state associated with today, and there's change, and then that's going to introduce what we want tomorrow to look like. And I think being clear as a leader on why is really important. And then I think, from the frontline perspective, I think understanding that why and being brought to the table and with the very clear purpose of why, I think that's really important. And then where I think data kind of fits is really bridging the two. I think, from a leadership perspective, what the data can do is help support why in the very beginning. If your goal is to prove shop floor efficiencies, then there's some measure that can be used to identify this is where we're at and this is where we need to go and why we're getting there. If it's a growth related, are there sales numbers, are there revenue numbers that can be shared of this is what we're doing and why we're getting there. So I think data is useful from an input perspective, and that data should be shared if it's possible with the front line. This is why we're doing it, and here's the data to support that. I think data also flows back the other direction, because along the path from point A to point B, through that change, there's going to be key indicators. There's going to be KPIs. There's going to be things you're going to want to monitor along the way. And that's where the front line and the data input comes into play. And that's where I think really having that human-centric consideration of how do you get the data and how are you making it the least manual for your front line to collect that data. What can you do to automate things and make it super easy to collect? I think that data can be used to fed back to leadership to see how things are going. So it really becomes a way to objectively communicate between the two.
Yeah, you mentioned a number of really great points. And just two that I really want to emphasize is that the why is so, so important. I can think of so many times when I was getting directives that I didn't necessarily understand the reasoning for, and questioned it and dragged my feet, and because I didn't understand the reasoning, like I didn't know the why behind it, and it didn't fit with my like idea and perception of where we were going as an organization, and it helps so much. If anyone out there who is not familiar with like the golden circle from Simon Sinek, like would highly recommend you go look at it. It really does. It does an excellent job of explaining why the why is so important.
Oh my
So
God.
if it's a golden, it's been around for so long, but it is just so useful. And I try to revisit that pretty regularly because it is not the natural way that we communicate, like as people.
Yeah.
And leading with why takes a lot of practice. And it's certainly something that like I'm working on. It's, so I pose the question for you, is that something that you have to work on often? Or
Oh
have
my
you, like, are you
God.
experienced at it at this point?
No, no, it was so it's funny. You're like, oh, I just hearing your frustration about not understanding the why. In those cases, I create my own why. And sometimes that can be in conflict with the larger organization why. And then I get married to my why.
Yeah.
And
I've never had the
me
proactive why approach, though. That's interesting.
more frustrated. No,
Yeah.
it took me it took me a big change, a big career change. We'll summarize it at that.
Okay.
In a couple years of like misunderstanding or frustration, and when you really dive into the root cause of what didn't go well and why were things so misaligned, it 100% boils down to me not knowing the why. 100%. So.
Yeah. And then so Ellen just posted a great comment here. I'm going to go ahead and pin it, saying that malicious compliance is not fun. Transparency of information flows up and down are necessary so that the organization can understand what the vision is and get alignment into why things are done in a certain way. And, I think that also really touches on the importance of like data capture from the bottom up. And as you were mentioning, making sure that that's really easy. So I'll let you go ahead and respond, Alan.
Yeah, no, Alan, I think that absolutely makes sense. I like your use of the word transparency of information. I think in a data-driven culture, that transparency is fundamental. And when you don't have that, there's just a certain lack of trust. And when you don't have a good amount of trust, I think understanding the vision and being connected to it becomes impossible. So I appreciate your comment.
Yeah. So that also, like, I guess led me to the second point that I wanted to highlight was, again, making that easy for operators to provide that information flow upward. I don't know if this has been Carol's experience, but, I connect with plant managers and folks on the shop floor regularly that still do things very manually, or, data capture is still a big pain point. And that's certainly a big area of opportunity for folks that are, helping companies along that digital transformation journey. And I know it's a pain point that a lot of manufacturers continue to feel.
Yes, Grace. The beginning of the journey for a lot of the customers is with whiteboards, and then spreadsheets, and then spreadsheets with Visual Basic commands, and then eventually leads to a fully digital solution. And yes, I've seen that as well. And one thing that I like, maybe Sarah and you too, Grace, I like the idea of including the front line in how the data is going to be captured, including even coming up with the labeling and the language that's used by the operators with it, rather than telling the operators, this is the language you're going to use to communicate with us. And I like that. And Sarah, maybe do you have a comment on that?
No, I think that's a great point. And I think keeping things in people's language. I mean, if you're implementing a system, your stakeholders include the people that are going to include your front line. And if data input is necessary, if you were in sales, you would consider that them to be your customer, right? And speaking in your customer's language is important for the sales.
Like a basic rule, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think thinking about your frontline operators as your customers and meeting them where they are, I think it's really important. And sometimes that means a different language, and then how do you plan for that? And maybe as an organization, you're not used to having to translate the screens into a different language, but it absolutely should be considered. And I can think back to times where, in the very beginning, I was like, well, I think the biggest shift is that mindset in human centric implementation, and it's something that I'm very glad to see. And I could embarrassingly describe a bunch of times where it was, here you go, you got to do what I'm giving you because that's what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah, that top down doesn't work as well as it maybe once did.
I'm glad. It's
Yeah,
more
no, I think it's
fun.
for the best. Absolutely.
It's so much more fun when people are engaged and motivated.
So, kind of in that vein, we have a number of comments from Amir, but one that I would like to pin is, again, how do you organize data around an organization that ensures that it's connecting the organization and reducing silos? This is also important to consider when we're talking about user language.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think in terms of organizing data, I think there's a bunch of ways I can go with this question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is consumption of data. And that might be different than how data is organized. When I think of organizing data, I think of data warehouses, I think of data lakes, I think about how do you have master data management so that your data is stored in a way that's organized by topic, it's accessible to other people, there's quality controls built around it, and there's a whole structure associated with the data itself. But in order to break down the silos around the organization and make the data available, you also have to consider this consumption element. And it might be different based on the user, the function, how you communicate. I think, in some of my work experience, we've tried to harmonize metrics and dashboards so that things are not built within a function, but end up becoming cross-functional. So that if you're looking at a specific business KPI, whether you're in manufacturing or in purchasing or you're in quality, you're looking at the same metric and the same data feeds that metric. So I just, I hope, Amir, that answers your question.
Well, I think it's certainly a good question, and I think you're spot on with in terms of like understanding how that's used. Being sure that you're comparing apples to apples, but that as someone who's maybe on the shop floor, I need to see a certain angle of that apple versus someone who's in management is going to need to see a different angle. But we're still speaking a similar language and getting the information that's relevant to us, whether that's like my production quota for the day, or how we're tracking towards our overall goal for the shift or for the quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if it's okay, I'd like to move on to different questions, Sarah, for you. Now, as a manager of managers, when you're looking for managers who would be working with you, what are you looking for in the skills, in the person and experience? When you're looking for either somebody internally or somebody new to the organization?
I think for me, team culture is number one. And what I want to cultivate within my team is a place where people feel safe to push back, where they're willing to collaborate and help each other out, and also can recognize where people have opportunity to develop and help coach and mentor them accordingly. So with that in mind, I really try to find candidates that are and people that are going to help create that type of culture. And so the first thing, the characteristic that I look for is empathy. I think having having empathy is really fundamental or foundational to creating an environment of openness, because if you're willing to put yourself in someone else's shoes, they're going to feel more comfortable opening up. And I think that's important. And that helps in establishing trust. I think
talking about trust. I just want to applaud it every time I hear it. It's so critical.
It's so critical. And it's like, in that when you trust each other, you're going to be more willing to help each other out. You're going to be, if you have those failures, right, you're going to be more apt to diagnose what happened and figure out how to fix them as a team. And I think that's really important. When I'm hiring a manager, I think the other thing that's important is adaptability. Things change in project management, especially. You're going to have curveballs thrown at you, and understanding like how to help the team shift and pivot and overcome challenges and having that flexibility, I think is really, really important. And then I'd say communication is kind of the third characteristic that I would look for in hiring a manager.
Yeah, 100%. Just, I think based on my own experiences, and I think we all, have potentially an experience where this has been the case, is that, for the teams that I've worked in where there has been an environment of a lot of trust, it's really easy to go to your team and to your management with things that are maybe, not always fun to hear or fun to discuss, but because you have that psychological safety and knowing like, okay, me voicing this opinion or this perspective isn't going to jeopardize my job, but really like I'm here to provide this opinion that's, we need to focus on this, and like, kind of raising up that flag and saying, hey, this needs attention, I think is really important versus, staying silent and just saying, I'm just going to watch this blow over, like not my circus, not my monkeys. Right.
Yeah.
And environments of trust, like it does help people take ownership over the process because again, you're listened to and you feel more part of the process and you're there to contribute to its betterment. And that's something that's really important. And people that can foster that trust and kind of build that it's fantastic. They're a good resource.
I think as a leader, we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to have a better idea, especially if you build a good team, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be lots of good ideas out there. So having the ability to create an environment where people can speak up, have that's how you're going to drive growth within the team, is to really nurture those inputs, and whether they're negative or positive, like whether it's an innovation idea or it's, hey, you screwed up and this is why. You need both to grow. So
yeah.
I
guess, go ahead, Carol. Go ahead.
Yes, I've seen some individual-based and team-based software that some organizations are using to, it's kind of like not an aptitude, but temperament and skills-based questionnaire where it's done by the entire team. And this way you can, it's loosely, you have to take it for what it's worth, but I think there might be some value in at least learning each other's strengths and weaknesses as a team, where you can work together and see how best to move forward and plan, and where somebody has an area for growth where maybe you can challenge them versus somebody who has a real high discomfort level in one area. What are you thinking when you're I guess assigning or thinking about who's good for certain roles?
So, well, first of all, Carol, if there's links to these types of things, I'd love for those to get dropped or shared with me, because I think it's always good to learn. I think and then to go back to your question on how do you figure out how to fit people or learn with them, I personally just spend a lot of time in one-on-one sessions with my team, and try to have like a very frank and open and hopefully productive dialogue. I think having an assessment like that that's more objective may be helpful for everybody, because it, I might have blind spots as a manager to my employee just as much as they might have them to themselves. But in lieu of that, it's a conversation of, where do you want to go next? And how does that compare with what do you have today? And then how can we shift your work so that it's helping you take steps in the direction of where you want to go, but also accomplishing the team mission. So example might be, I had one employee and he wanted to become a people manager, a manager next. That was definitely the goal. And so as part of that, you need to, if you're going to be promoted within an organization, you need to help build trust with the leaders ahead of you. So I gave him ample opportunity to take a portion of the program and own it and presented it that way. So I no longer presented the updates on that portion of the program. That specific employee really did, and was able to showcase, I've got this mission. I'm able to execute accordingly, and I can communicate, at a higher level than what would have been necessarily required in my job.
I really like that, Sarah. And career pathing is something that we talked about last week with our previous guest, and the importance of it. And I'm really happy to hear that that's a part of what you're doing with the people that are working for you. So thank you.
I think, yeah, in a vein too, we have a comment from Mike Unger that's, as you drive change in your organization, what are some of the keys to sustaining the gains that you have made throughout the projects that you implement? So there's a lot
Mike,
there. I see it.
Mike, I wish I had a recipe for this one, and I do not. I've seen projects, especially in the artificial intelligence / machine learning place. I think really having something implemented to stick later has been a challenge that I'm still seeking to solve. But where I've seen, in other projects, those sustainable gains, I think the best practice is, when the project is complete, having a clear operational owner that we will take the KPIs that you've determined the success of your project and continue on that path. I think are really important. And in order to do that, you need to bring them in the beginning. And so I think identifying who is important for long-term sustainability of that project. Then you need to know who they are up front, pull them in and make them part of the team, make them feel like their input is included and necessary. Especially if you're trying to drive change and the specific organization is resistant to change, having an equal voice and really understanding maybe some of their frustrations and being able to even solve a portion of it, you may get enough buy-in that when the project is complete, the sustainability aspect of it goes a lot easier.
Yeah, I think in that vein, and to your point of kind of like finding those people that are really committed to the success of a change, change management or like some continuous improvement project, is that, listening to the folks that, maybe complain a lot, that like see that friction and like make noise about it, like, okay, let's do something about it. Are you willing to put that energy behind, making these changes that you want to see? Or, folks that are, kind of doing that hand raising, like they are visible within an organization if you're taking a look, and through that kind of peer-to-peer engagement, this is something that I see kind of on the technology supplier end, is that the folks that are really excited about it on the shop floor, that get their hands on the opportunity to make change, like really bring in a lot of people a lot faster, because again, it's that grassroots thing of like, oh hey, Tony over there is really excited about this, like maybe I should check it out, like why are they so excited about this?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's been your experience as well. It kind of really sounds like it.
No, I think
from
that
the recipes that you're, I guess the baseline that you established between that recipe.
No, I think you took it a step further, and I like where, that organic grassroots enthusiasm and support. Oh my gosh, you couple that with some yeah, I think I missed that, and I'm glad that you added it.
Yeah. Well, it manifests itself in different forms, right? Like you have the
Mhm,
squeaky wheels that are saying like, I don't like how this is going versus like folks that get really excited about, you know,
mhm,
you nerd out about a specific, theory, concept, technology, what have you. And if you're able to make that connection, then like, great, let's run with it. And, connect it
mhm.
obviously to the bottom line. Um, Now, kind of taking that kind of that initiative or, providing people with that opportunity to kind of step forward and test out their leadership skills, like you were mentioning with this employee of yours that you handed the reins to a specific portion of a project. How can we help women who are interested in developing their leadership skills, in manufacturing specifically? Where do you start? And then how has mentorship not only helped you, but how do you see that helping young women? And I guess what advice do you often give to them?
So I think for women specifically, I definitely recommend seeking a mentor,
Mhm.
somebody that will be able to that you can listen to, somebody that will be able to help you, hopefully somebody that's well networked as well, because a mentor can help identify opportunities. And as women, we are not as likely to go seek new things. I think we want to be asked to be brought to the table.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I think, establishing that network it is great. And I think it can start with a mentor. Um, I also think it's a good idea to find peer mentorship too. So maybe not somebody that's ahead, but often as a woman in manufacturing, it's lonely.
Mhm.
It's, I remember in my shop floor days, I don't know, it was definitely it felt like less than 10% of the people I've seen. I don't know what the exact data is, but it can be lonely. And so finding people that you could become peers with, that understand a bit about what you're going through is good. And the reason why I say that is because when you can get things off your chest and you can talk through things that you have doubts about, you free up capacity within yourself to really allow for you to plan. Okay, now I want to grow as a leader, and
Mhm.
I have the ability to work on those things that I need to do in order to develop those skills. And I've gotten rid of that baggage of things that I'm holding on to because I don't have anybody to talk to about them. I don't know where to go. And I, have that help navigating the network, et cetera. And so, and then I think in terms of developing leadership skills, anybody can develop leadership skills within their role. And I think as women, it boils down to confidence and persistence. Um, Confidence is something that I've had struggles with. It's gone up and down throughout my entire life. Over the last couple years, it's something that I've invested in heavily. That's the biggest reason why I said yes today, is because anytime you put yourself out there, you're like helping yourself grow and become more confident. And if you want to drive change and make a difference, like you need to believe in yourself to be able to do that.
Mhm.
And I say persistence because it's it's not an equal balance world yet. And if you're in a male dominated industry and environment, the first time you speak up on something may not be enough. And so if you see an opportunity and you want to go do something different or take on a stretch assignment or lead a project or do something to establish those leadership skills, you don't have to wait. You can get started today. All it takes is believing in yourself to do it and repeatedly voicing your opinion to be able to have the opportunity to do so.
I got chills when you said invest in confidence because I think that's such a great term and something that I had never like conceptualized that way. So I'd love to know what are some of the ways that you like have invested in your confidence in the past, or what does that sometimes look like?
So the first thing that I do to invest in my confidence is I invest in my own time.
Mhm.
I'm busy. I have a lot of things going on. And I carve out time for me to focus on me every day. And that's whether it's reading a book or journaling or sitting quietly or anything. I block out distractions. Nobody is allowed to interrupt my little me time. And I take time for myself. I think saying yes to things that are scary is another thing
Mm-hmm.
that's important to help investing in developing your confidence. Repeatedly saying things out loud that make you feel good, doing things that make you feel good. Those are
Yeah.
all ways that you can help invest in your confidence. I think once I did it was part of a program, and I did a poll, and I asked people what they thought of me, and I kept that. You know what I mean? I was given responses that really blew my mind, because I didn't believe that in myself that I offered that
Mm-hmm.
level of, and so having that to look back upon when you have those moments where you're not feeling so great, especially, the whole topic is about, growing through failure, right? So, in those moments where those mistakes happen and you find yourself beating yourself up, referring back to some of those kind words that people have said, and
Mm-hmm.
is good. And then Lisa, I'll have to drop it in the comments, but there is a woman, she has a book about practicing gratitude. And one of her suggestions is to have a wins journal. And every
Mm-hmm.
day you just write down a few wins for the day, whether it's, hey, I got my kids to school on time,
Yeah.
or it could be
Little or
something
big, a win
simple.
is a
It
win.
doesn't matter. But anyway, that was a lot probably, but
No, I think that's fantastic. And thank you for a lot of those very practical examples, because it's something that you mentioned, as being a woman in manufacturing, I think, potentially it's gotten easier. Like I must say, I've never worked on the shop floor, so I'll defer to your experience there. But being the other, or oftentimes like, the only one of your specific identity, whatever that, whatever confluence of identities you hold as an individual, like being an only can be very isolating. It can take a toll on your confidence. You are an outsider sometimes, and building, and that can really chip away at your confidence, which is why like investing in your confidence is so important. And again, that persistence piece you mentioned is just absolutely critical. You know, Maybe once isn't enough for someone to hear a genius idea. And I think we all kind of need those reminders, especially as women. Like, it's not that your idea is bad, you just might not have a receptive audience. And so keep trying, because who knows what'll happen. But those two things, are really critical to develop. And I say that like, I'm speaking to myself when I'm saying this too, right? Like, we all want to continue investing in our confidence, and, you know, having folks or having comments that are affirming, whether that's just from yourself or from others, is really important piece of that as well. Especially when, the failure mode kicks in and we start thinking like, oh, you start questioning yourself, and then that confidence can slip away too. So it's important to kind of build that back up.
it's definitely a muscle.
I really like
Yes.
I really like the persistence part,
Mhm.
Sarah, when you said that. I think because it lets your true passion show out. For example, if you have an interest in doing something and you mention it, and then kind of forget about it, if people don't really take it that seriously, then it's really kind of like that passion test. But if you're really passionate about doing something, then you'll go back and try and make your case. And I think that's when people maybe realize, oh, this person's really serious about what they're bringing up. And so I'm going to remember that one, Sarah. Thank you so much for that.
No problem. Some of those lessons came at a pretty significant cost. So,
Oof. Yeah. Those are painful ones, just suck to learn, but I think there's always a silver lining. Unfortunately, there's usually a big time element involved, right?
yeah.
It might take.
But
Mhm.
I don't know if I can look back at a
Mhm.
major low moment or a major failure, and I really struggle to find one that didn't come out where I'm better on the other side. And so, keeping that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Just might take some time for you to see that. Fortunately, learnings aren't always immediate. I wish they were. Life would be so much easier if that were the case. So I think we have one final question for you before we kind of do a quick wrap up. And really this is something that we've kind of gone back to. Deloitte recently published a study around women at work in 2022. They've really focused on burnout and how that's affecting a lot of women. And so this is, I see it too, tied to being oftentimes like a minority, whether that's, on the shop floor or just in general, you're in a very male dominated environment. And I think it's something that you mentioned yourself earlier, is that sometimes you don't always feel comfortable, talking about your experience, and that this it really negatively impacts women's experience in manufacturing. So I'm curious, like, what your encouragement is to women that are maybe feeling burned out, that are feeling isolated, and because this is not just an individual experience.
No, I mean, I think the most burned out that I ever felt was actually as I was exiting manufacturing. And, I was diehard. I want to be a plant manager. I had a baby and I worked in a toxic environment, and I ran the test area within the shop. I had responsibility for 3 shifts. I had an infant that I had to get to daycare, and there were people in the shop that would come to the work earlier than me and then point out all of the things that my team didn't do correct the night before. And so my solution to that was to wake up earlier, get to work earlier, leave to switch vehicles at daycare because the other, my significant other's vehicle couldn't have a car seat in it or whatever. Anyway, go back to work, pick up my daughter, go home, make dinner. It was a lot. I mean, talk about burning the candle at both ends. And ultimately, it helped accelerate my step into project management because I didn't want to be on the shop floor because I was that burnout. And so I think in hindsight, the first thing I would do is I would definitely not sacrifice myself to fix a culture. I would identify different ways, like the third shift team leader. Maybe there's data that he could be capturing that, I didn't have to go in and do that. I could have delegated, some of the things that would have made the conversation easier in the morning. I would have pushed back instead of, trying to work harder to overcome those situations. And I think for those that are, currently in those situations of experiencing burnout, learning to say no, I think is a big thing. I still struggle with this today, right? You want to please everybody and help everybody. And I think as women, we need to understand what are our key priorities and what's necessary to be successful in the job too, and making sure you're black and white about these are the objectives that are required for me to be successful in this career, and what's not in that list, and what can you say no to, or what can you stop doing, and really managing your time that way and prioritizing your time that way, and then learning when you need to take a break and take the break. And I think a good portion of that goes back to delegating. If your responsibilities are, hey, I go home and I'm making dinner and I'm cleaning the kitchen. If your kids are old enough, have them help. Like,
Yes.
if there's ways to like offload some of your responsibilities so that it's less go, plan, then you can kind of support that. And, Amir, I like that addition as well. I don't know if we want to tag it. But
This latest one.
Yeah. Find your supporters.
Yes.
That is important, and it goes back to like finding the peer that you can offload. And I think the same thing can be true in life, and work and life do go hand in hand. And, stress in one area will resonate in the other area. So I'd say, yeah.
Well, I just want, I'm echoing the sentiment of lots of folks in the comments here, but really thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for sharing your experience and the wisdoms. We've got, a number of comments here just expressing thanks. And, I think I agree to everyone in the audience. Thank you very much for your input. And thank you, Sara, for all of this. It's been like a fantastic conversation, and it's really wonderful to learn and hear from the experiences of other women, especially in manufacturing, and how you've overcome those successes and like learned to fail forward and fail fast, and push that forward into building a life and a career that works better for you. And that's much appreciated. Carol, I don't toss it to you, but thank you.
Thank you.
Same to me as well. I agree with a lot of the posts, the comments that you pinned up there, and I do really appreciate you giving us something to think about and some things to learn from as well, Sara.
Yes, and thank you to everybody that has come to support the conversation today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you, Carol. Thank you, Grace.
Of course.
And now I'm.
Usually we do a very last minute final takeaways in our room, Sara. And
Okay.
maybe Grace, if you want to go first, and then Sara, we can give you the last word.
Oh, there are so many takeaways, but I think personally what I am going to be taking away from this conversation is really, labeling the ways in which like I can invest in my confidence. And I think that's like a great message to, women across the board. I see so many girls that have, so much confidence, and then the world kind of like dims that light a little bit. And I think that's so important to start like investing in confidence at an early age and kind of continue that. Like I've just with the pandemic and just all the changes that has often implied, I think like my confidence has certainly taken a number of hits, and being able to come forth with strategies to build that back up, like professionally, personally, it's just really critical for leading a fulfilling life and being happy in what you're doing, and know that you have the agency and power to do that. So I just think that's absolutely so critical, and goes hand in hand with failures, right? Just because you've experienced failure and you can learn from that, doesn't mean that needs to come at the cost of confidence, but it oftentimes does. So that's just both for me, and I want to reiterate that for the audience. I think that's absolutely critical. So that's my big takeaway. Carol?
Very good. That's excellent, Grace. Thank you. And there is a post, comment in there. I think somebody is referring.
Yes. Is this the book that you were referring to?
No, I haven't read this one.
Okay, but great. We'll look it up anyway.
Yeah.
And I think I already mentioned a point that really held true to me, and that's the persistence side. And I think everybody can learn from persistence and communicating really what you're really passionate about, and being persistent about it really shows your passion. And I'm going to take that away with me, Sara, for today. And I hope everybody can learn from that as well. So we'll give you the last word.
Well, first of all, thank you. I wasn't expecting to take the conversation to confidence, but I'm glad it went there, because I think for women especially, it's important. It's an important element. And I think for me, the biggest kind of takeaway I have is I tend to think in terms of like it's been a long time since I'm like mumbling my words now.
We'll edit it in post. It's fine.
You can keep it short.
I screwed that up. No, I think, just going back to connecting with the front line, even in those elements where you may not even be doing projects that are directly there. At the end of the day, all the work that we're doing is the purpose of manufacturing is to make things for others, right? And that requires people. and it requires people with boots on the ground. And I think keeping that in mind, even when I'm working on projects that aren't directly tied, I think becomes really important. And it could be from a data standpoint, being able to take data from other parts of the organization and how do you make it in a way that can be accessible and transparent to all portions of the organization, I think is my biggest takeaway.
That's great. I think I'm going to close off the room with that, Sarah. And if you like having conversations like this, please follow us on LinkedIn, the Industry 4.0 Club, where we have LinkedIn Live events Mondays through Thursdays at 12:30 p.m., except Wednesdays we have the fireside chat at 11:30 a.m. And you can also find us on the Clubhouse app, where we do have our rooms when we're running rooms at the same time, 12:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday, except Wednesday is 11:30 a.m. So with that, I'd like to close the room and wish everyone a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you.